it's one of those things, I guess, people really have to just figure out like if I'm unhappy, why am I unhappy, or what's going to make me happy. 9 times out of 10, it's not going to be money. It's not going to be spending.
Welcome to the Revolution of One podcast, where the revolution will not only be televised, but also individualized.
Today's guest is Nate Washington, the co-founder and CTO of Qoins. Qoins is a financial wellness app that combines automation and education to help people pay off their debts more efficiently. Today, Nate and I are going to talk about how he generates creative ideas, how he finds a way to get things done when his environment and mood doesn't support him, and we'll talk a little bit about his background and who inspired him to rise to the occasion of his potential. Nate, thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
So Nate, we previously had your co-founder, Christian Zimmerman, on the show. Mm-hmm. And he talks about you as, you were the salvation. This was something that could have never happened without you. There were a lot of early technological hiccups with getting Qoins started, and you delivered a lot of major home runs in order to help save the company. Talk to me a little bit about how you got involved in Qoins, how you met Christian, and how you joined the team.
Yeah. I mean, it's a nice thing for him to say for sure. Right back at him. I feel like, without him, we wouldn't be where we are today either. But we met back in 2016 at a networking event. So for me, I started a couple companies before Qoins. I built a few apps that never really got off the ground. Got a little bit of traction, some customers, but ultimately didn't really go far. So around the time I met Christian, I was just a freelance developer building apps for whoever was willing to pay me. Wasn't really looking to join a startup per se. Once you've shut down 2 companies, you kind of just want to pay the bills at that point, mm-hmm. Right?
Yeah.
And Christian didn't have any money to pay me. So somehow he still managed to convince me to work for free for basically 2 years. But one thing about him that I really liked when I met him is that he already had the idea. He had already built a landing page for Qoins and gotten about 150 or 200 people to give them their email address, right? Mm. So for me, it's like, okay, this is not just an abstract idea. This is something that people are actually interested in using. So it's funny, I didn't really tell him that day that I wanted to work with him or was even interested in building Qoins. I kind of just made some mental notes, went home, kind of tinkered with it, because I never really built something like Qoins before, like mm-hmm. a financial app. So I wasn't even sure if I could do it. Mm-hmm. But after spending some time, maybe about a week or so, tweaking with kind of like a bank login flow, I kind of reached back out to him and said, hey, just want to show you something. Would love to sit down and chat about it, right?
Yeah.
And then for him, he actually had a meeting with a dev shop right after our meeting that was going to help him build out the app. They wanted a bunch of equity, plus they were going to charge him some money. So when I showed him what I had, he was kind of blown away. And I always make the joke, it's easy to impress people as a developer who are non-developers because they don't really understand the technology behind it. He brought me into the meeting with the dev shop right after that, and needless to say, they were not too happy at that point.
Not too happy because your idea was so good, or you were competition? Why were they not happy?
Yeah, a little bit of a competition, because when I showed Christian after our meeting, he was like, hey, if you want to work with me, let's work together, let's do this. So at that point, he had decided, I want to work with you.
Yeah.
So in the meeting, he was kind of figuring out how can we make this work or something like that, right? Kind of I guess if you're casually dating someone and then you end up sitting down with somebody else that you're casually dating, you're like, all right, let's this is kind of awkward.
It's but why'd you bring this guy here? Right. I thought we had something. Yeah.
Right. So kind of something like that. Mm-hmm. But in the end, we ended up sticking it out, working together, and here we are today.
Now, in the space you were working in prior to working with Christian, mm-hmm. you've been to a lot of networking events, you've seen a lot of different apps, you've heard a lot of different pitches. Yeah. What was it about the philosophy and mission of Qoins that made you say, this is the one?
Yeah. So I did a lot of due diligence on my part, right? Mm-hmm. So for me, the boxes that I checked were, I had the problem that the company was trying to solve myself, right? You know, I had student loans, I had car debt, credit card debt, all of the above, right? Medical debt. So for me, it made sense because it's like, oh wow, like if we build this, I can use it, right?
Yeah.
But beyond that too, you know, I kind of got outside of that and started asking people, both who were friends, family, and then just people that I didn't really know too well either. You know, what do you think about this idea? Would you use something like this? Or have you heard of something like this before, right? Because for me, I've always been a believer that like you can talk to your friends and family about an idea that you have or like something that you're considering building, but they're also kind of biased towards you because like they love you as like for who you are. So they're gonna tell you what you want to hear, right?
Sure. Yeah.
Like, hey, like if I built this, would you use it? Yeah, of course I'd use it because you built it, right? Thanks, Mom. But at the same time, if you can ask people who either don't know you too well or that you're not really close with, like, have you heard of an app that does this, or is this something that you would use? A lot of times those people will be a little more honest with you. So that was kind of a key for me. And I asked a lot of those questions before I even went back to Christian with what I had. Because for me, I was already doing contract work on the side to pay the bills. So, you know, if I tinkered around with it and like I asked people about it and like what I got back wasn't, you know, what I was looking for, like people weren't really willing to use it, I don't lose anything, right? I don't have to work on it. But it was really encouraging to hear people who wanted to use it. So
I like how you said, this is a product that I would be a customer for, right? That this wasn't just like, oh, I think it can make a lot of money. Oh, he's built up a lot of momentum, but I believe in this enough. I heard Zig Ziglar say one time that, you know, if you're selling something and a person says, I'm not sure, like, I think I can kind of afford it, but I have to give my last dollar to be able to buy it. He says, if you can't take that last dollar, then you should go sell something else.
Sure.
He says, because you ought to believe that when you give someone a product, you're offering them more value than the money they're sacrificing. Like, that's the kind of conviction that you got to have. And you clearly seem to have that.
Yeah.
How has it changed your life? You started off having these debts. How has Qoins altered that situation for you?
Yeah, so in terms of my debt, so the car I had at the time that we started Qoins, I've since sold that car and I am currently paying off another car, which Qoins is actually going to save me about 9 months in payment time. So I should own it about 9 months early. So I'm on track for that. I've actually close to about $2,000 paid off with Qoins so far, which is crazy to me because, and I know this makes sense, but like as like the I guess the initial like developer who worked on it and built it, I'm like the first customer of Qoins technically because I was the first account that was created. So it's like interesting seeing like how long I've been on it, how much debt I've paid off and things like that, and kind of like forecasting like, okay, people who are now coming onto the platform, this is where they'll be if they stick with the platform that long too. So in terms of my debt, it's been a huge help. In terms of just like my overall life, I'd say that the past few years working on Qoins have been the best years of my life. Christian, like you said, he markets me as like the savior of Qoins or something like that. But honestly, like meeting him and working with him has been like literally like the best decision I've ever made. We complement each other really well. I've changed so much as a person, whether it's from like a confidence standpoint, whether it's from the way I approach things, whether it's from being able to manage a team or things like that. I've worked jobs in the past that, you start at an entry level, you work your way up, do things like that. It's way different, obviously, when you're starting at the top and you're responsible for setting everything from like the company's culture towards, making sure that everybody's okay. Because at the end of the day, when you have people working for you, it's not just like, okay, come to work, do your job, go home, right? Like people have lives, and you have to care about those lives and understand that like these are human beings, and I have to put our company in a position to better their lives, right? We've had to let people go that didn't work out in the past, right? And when it comes to that, what's going through your head is, man, like this is this person's livelihood. Like it's not working out for us, but now they're no longer going to be able to collect a paycheck from us, and where does that leave them, right?
Yeah.
So it's changed a lot of the ways I look at life, and I look at like the people around me. So
I often say that responsibility is the ultimate intelligence enhancer.
Right.
When you're in a position where your actions will affect something or someone other than your own interest, your own impulses, like it just changes the way you think entirely.
For sure.
I want to talk more about debt. I feel like debt is one of those funny subjects in the financial services world because it's probably the least exciting. Number one, it forces us to be honest about some pretty unpleasant truths in our lives.
Right.
And two, it sounds less fun to me to say, hey, let's pay my debt versus let's get rich quick, or let's make some fast money in the stock market. What are some of the things you guys are doing education-wise to teach people the sorts of things they need to know in order to become excited about, fixing their debt, in order to see the relevance of it, and in order to believe that this is something they can actually do?
Yeah. So a big focus we've had recently is on financial literacy, right? So we've got a lot of content that we push out around that. Every week we have something called Tip Tuesday, where we push out a new educational video where we kind of talk about a topic. And they're not all about debt, right? They're in the general financial sense, right? So everything from what is a credit check to how to get your feet wet with investing, or how to do like a no spend week to get yourself back on track, or things like that. So we push out a lot of that stuff. We're also working on integrating into the app certain things that we don't currently offer but are important towards getting out of debt, right? So whether that's being able to set up an emergency fund in the app so that you don't have to put things back on your credit card, whether that's giving you better budgeting advice, helping you improve your credit score, things like that. And then ultimately, like you said, other forms of like financial products may be more attractive, like from an outside perspective, whether it's investing or saving. But we work on educating people to understand that, if you're saving money and you're getting like less than 0.5% interest rate in your savings account, but your average credit card interest rate is around 15%, which is the nationwide average, you're still losing money, right? You're getting 0.5% interest by just leaving your money there when you could pay down your high interest debt faster, which is going to save you more money in the long term. So we work on educating people around that and talking about, okay, whether it's paying off your smaller balance first or paying off your highest interest debt first, we want to save you more money in the long run, right? There's a few interesting statistics that we recently learned, and that's that the average person dies with over $61,000 of debt. That's not necessarily like just credit card debt or one specific form of debt. Maybe that's mortgage debt as well. But they die with over $61,000 worth of debt. The average person pays over $240,000 of interest in their lifetime, and about 1 in 2 Americans are not considered financially literate. So we're trying to change those statistics by educating people about things about interest rates, about things about their credit score, and all of the above, right? I mean, $240,000 worth of interest, that's a house, right?
That's a lot, yeah.
Like you basically paid for a house without actually having a house to show for it, right?
Yeah.
So
1 in 2 Americans are not financially literate. That's
right.
Wow, that's a whopping statistic. So first, I want you to expound on that and tell us a little bit about what that means to be financially literate.
Sure.
And then two, what do you think the problem is that's resulting in so many people just not knowing, these basics?
Yeah. So in terms of like financial literacy, it's in terms of like things such as the payment amounts you're making and things like that. So, a lot of people, they'll take out a credit card or a loan or things like that. They'll get their monthly bill, they'll pay their monthly bill, they'll wash their hands of it, and they're done, right? But they're paying more and more on interest instead of taking just a little bit extra to pay every month and paying off things, paying it off faster, right? So things like that. And then whether it's, we talked about interest rates for savings accounts, and a lot of people, they'll open a savings account and they'll park money there, right? But a lot of times there's a better way for your money that's just sitting there to earn money for you, right? Like I said, a lot of savings accounts are less than 0.5%. There's a lot of like high interest savings accounts out there now that will get you higher than 1% or even 2% or higher, right? So there's a lot of small like nuances that people can do to like optimize and make their money work for them as opposed to working harder for their money, right?
Yeah.
And that overall like encompasses like financial literacy as well as like understanding like certain terms, right? What is a soft credit check versus a hard credit check? Did you know that by like you might be in financial trouble, but like by continuing to apply for credit card after credit card after credit card, you're hurting your credit score even more by all the inquiries. So there's a lot of things like that. And in terms of what contributes to that problem, looking at it from what we've seen, the problem really disproportionately affects minorities, right? So, I'm Black, Christian as Hispanic. So we both come from, minority communities, and, whether it's seeing it from our friends that look like us, or our family members, things like that, historically, they're, whether it's Black families, Hispanic families, Asian families, et cetera, those families don't have a lot of generational wealth or the generational knowledge of finances. So, it's just not being passed down from generation to generation. Whereas, white communities or non-minority communities, the average household income is much higher. Actually, I think I saw a statistic today, like the average median income for Black and Hispanic communities are like $17,000 and $20,000 a year. Wow. Like a median income, whereas like for white communities, the median is 117, which I get that, like, you don't really see a lot of people walking around that make $117,000. Like, average person doesn't know a ton of people that make that much money. But at the same time, that wage gap is insane, right?
Yeah.
And that definitely contributes to like the financial literacy problem. So,
and part of what makes this such a tough problem is because it's overwhelming, especially if you don't have that knowledge you just pointed out, and it requires a tremendous amount of patience.
Sure.
I think many people dream of the day where maybe there's a big payday and they can wipe out all their debts with one check. And for most of us, that's never happening. Yeah. It's more like these unimpressive action steps we take over time that have a cumulative effect. I'd like to know from you, do you have any success stories where you've seen people experiencing this kind of debt or being financially illiterate, and through the use of these kinds of services, they overcome that?
Yeah. I mean, we've got plenty of examples just from our own customers, right? Mm-hmm. So at least a few times a month, we'll get somebody that'll reach out to our support team and say, hey, like, just curious about how I can cancel my Qoins account for now. And, we'll say, okay, we're sorry to see you go. Can you let us know why you want to stop using Qoins for now? It's like, well, I paid off all my debt. Oh, that's great. Can you do a testimonial for us? Can we do a video or something like that? And we're starting to get more and more of those now. And for us, it's probably the best feeling in the world, right? Because you're obviously a business to make a profit and make money, right? But when you see what you're doing actually like change the lives of someone, and it's someone that you don't know, right? It's just like Peter out in Texas or something like that, somebody random that you've never met and that you never will meet. It's like, wow, this is crazy, right? So we see that every month with our customers. And it's funny you mentioned the other part too about how people expect to get a huge payout and just pay off everything all at once, right? And that typically doesn't happen because people who already don't understand certain things about money, when they get that much money, they don't spend it wisely and it disappears like that, right? Mm. And I know I keep referencing studies and statistics, but there's another study that winners of the lottery are not only more likely to go broke in their own right, but their neighbors are actually more likely to raise their level of spending and go into higher levels of debt as a result. Because you see your neighbor who wins the lottery, and now they're buying all these new cars, buying all these new nice things, and you're right next door, and you kind of look at your house and you say, man, they got all that stuff over there. Maybe I should step it up a little bit. So you go out and buy a new car. You spend a little more money to spruce your place up and all that kind of stuff. So winning the lottery or getting that huge payout actually has a trickle-down effect to the people that surround you as well. It's actually interesting.
You know, that's an interesting phenomenon, and I think it applies to so many other things, not just money. You know, you look at another person and what they seem to be experiencing. It could be, hey, this person has 1 million followers on Instagram, and I have 100. I guess that means I'm a loser, right? You know, I guess that means I need to change something or whatever it may be. And I kind of think of debt as sort of like compromising your potential because you are not valuing what you possess right now in some kind of way, right? What do you say to people who fall into that comparison trap, whether it's financial or social or you know, business-wise? They say, well, this person has so much more than me, and it makes me feel like crap. I know that's the wrong answer on a test, but that's how I feel.
Yeah. And it really depends on the situation too and the type of debt, right? So we typically look at 2 different kinds of debt, right? Good debt and bad debt, right? We consider good debt to be maybe like a mortgage that's within your budget or within what you can afford, right? Because I mean, you're probably not going to be able to pay cash for a house anytime soon, right? And then also maybe something like a student loan. And that's a gray area nowadays too, with like the student loan bubble and the cost of education rising, and you know, looking at your expected income after you graduate with your degree, all that kind of stuff, right? There's a lot of people out there going $100,000 into student debt to make $45,000 a year when they graduate. It's just insane, right? But in terms of people kind of seeing you know, other people, whether it's friends or family that are out there like doing big things or you know, flexing on Instagram, and they feel they need to like kind of keep up or things like that. It's really a discipline thing, right? Because it's easy to fall into that trap, but at the end of the day, there's a lot of people out there that are showing off that don't really have what they kind of portray themselves to have, right? And a lot of times they're going into massive amounts of debt themselves, right? So, I mean, sure, it tends to affect probably like a younger demographic a little more, especially when you look at like, you know, financial literacy and understanding all that kind of stuff. But at the end of the day, I think kind of staying within your means, spending what you can, and setting yourself up for the future long term is what's more important, right? Because I know looking at myself and looking at my generation, I'm not confident we're gonna have Social Security or anything like that. You know, my dad actually has retired 5 times in his career, and I know that's an insane amount. But like right now he gets different retirement checks from different companies. He gets Social Security, all that kind of stuff. So he's good. He doesn't have to work. They paid off the house, all that kind of stuff. Yeah. I'm never gonna be in that situation, because like I'm not gonna be able to collect like a bunch of retirement or Social Security, all that kind of stuff. Just because, you know, it's not. I mean, if we look at where Social Security is at now, it just doesn't look. The outlook doesn't look good for people my age when they get to that retirement age. So.
Yeah. I mean, we definitely have a greater burden now to educate ourselves and take our future into our own hands. For someone that's listening and they're thinking, man, I'm one out of the 2 that lacks financial literacy. Yeah. What's a small step they can take in the right direction? Are there any resources you recommend, books, podcasts, whatever it may be, where people can start to educate themselves?
Yeah. So a few that we've worked with, well, I mean, obviously Qoins, but a few that we've worked with beyond that are The Penny Hoarder, Budgets Are Sexy, and there's a few other whose names I just can't think of right now. But I would generally say, as a general rule of thumb, all the information you could ever need is out there, right? We live in a day and age where finding anything on Google is incredibly easy, right? You just have to be willing to put in the time and be willing to learn, to educate yourself. Because there isn't gonna be anybody that does it for you, right? One of the things we've seen with a lot of apps in the past, like financial focused apps, that we wanted to be a little bit different from. So there's a lot of apps there that will, you know, you connect all your accounts, right? And they'll make a bunch of recommendations. And, you know, let's say like, hey, I want to, you know, reduce my grocery budget by $100 this month, right? This app is gonna scream at me when I'm approaching that budget and say like, hey, stop spending, you're about to go over your budget, whatever. the problem with that is you don't really have to listen to that app, right? If you feel like I know I'm close to my budget, but I just really want to do this or things like that, right? That's a willpower thing, right?
Yeah.
So for us, we're looking at ways to go a step further and not just say, okay, this is what you should do. It's, okay, how can we help make this easier for you to do? Is it doing it for you? Is it meeting you halfway? And that's kind of like our premise behind the whole, like, whether it's like rounding up your purchases or, deducting the money to pay for your debt from your paycheck or something like that, right? How can we make it easy as possible for you so that you don't have to make the tough choice all the time, right?
Yeah.
Because willpower is a tough thing for a lot of people, right? And that's really what it comes down to. So,
one related concept is happiness. I believe that part of the problem why we have so much debt is because we bought into this philosophy that says the best way to be happy is to get more stuff, right?
Yeah.
And we feel empty on the inside, and we believe that stuff will fill those empty spaces. Tell me a little bit about your philosophy of happiness.
Yeah.
What drives you?
What drives me? I'd say for me, it's waking up every morning and knowing that I have a purpose, right? Mm-hmm. Knowing that I'm doing something that moves the needle for me, but that also kind of puts a positive effect into the world, right? I think I mentioned to you earlier that, my mom is a minister, mm-hmm. And the values that she kind of instilled in me were to always kind of like think about others and how what you're doing affects others and people around you, right? It's not always about you.
Yeah.
So from a general sense of happiness, that's kind of what drives me. But I think from like a broader perspective, like the answer is different for everyone, right? And you're absolutely right. There's a correlation between being unhappy and spending more money as a result to try to fill that void. And it's one of those things, I guess, people really have to just figure out, like, if I'm unhappy, why am I unhappy, or what's going to make me happy? 9 times out of 10, it's not going to be money. It's not going to be spending. You can look at, tons of, whether it's celebrities, athletes, pick one that's had issues in the past like 5 years, and money didn't solve their problems. They're still people just like you and I. Yeah. They still deal with issues every single day. The money just makes maybe their quality of life is different and it's easier. Yeah. But it doesn't solve your core problem.
You mentioned that your mom is a minister. So we both grew up in the church.
Yeah.
And I know for me, I grew up hearing a whole bunch of sermons and all of that, but I didn't get it early on, man. I tuned that stuff out, or I spent most of my time talking or playing with action figures, on the sly while in church services. Did you get this stuff that you talk about now early on? Have you always been like this, or was there some sort of game-changing event that made it all click for you?
Yeah, so when you say that, do you mean in terms of like, just like how I approach life, or more so kind of like the financial knowledge or stuff like that?
Particularly the purpose-driven perspective. Sure. You wake up with this sense of, I exist for a reason,
yeah,
and I'm gonna rise to the occasion of my potential, and I'm gonna make a difference. You always had that conviction?
I wouldn't say always. I'd say I probably developed it in like my preteen or teenage years. Mm-hmm. For me, growing up, I was incredibly shy, got bullied a lot, and I was the kind of person that got bullied and started fighting back. So I got into a lot of fights in elementary school too. But for me, I'd say, because my mom actually became a minister probably around the time I was like 11.
Okay.
So as she was in the church and started kind of going through that, like in those early like teenage years, I remember one day, we went to a church service, and we were actually still pretty new to this church, right? We didn't really know a ton of people, and our pastor, he picked me out of the crowd and, came up and said, "Hey, I want you to know that there's a purpose for your life. And I want you to know that Jesus has called on you to do something important in life. So, stick by him, follow him, and you're going to fulfill that purpose that was set out for you. And so my mom is always kind of like she always took that and said, don't forget, you've got a purpose for your life. Make sure you're living for that purpose. And of course, you don't know what that purpose is right away. You don't know like what your path looks like or things like that. But I think in the back of my head, that's kind of always like resonated with me. Like, try to live a good life, try to do the right things, and make sure that you're living for whatever purpose you're supposed to fulfill. And it hasn't been perfect. I've definitely stumbled quite a few times along the way. I've had some days I wasn't proud of, and some days I wish I could go back and change. But for me, it's always about, what can I do to make sure that I do my part to leave the world in a better place than it was when I found it. So that's kind of what drives me.
That question of purpose, a lot of people feel perplexed by that.
Sure.
What gives life meaning? How do I even go about finding, what the meaning of my life is? And for you, there was a gap in time between having a conviction that I have a purpose and then kind of knowing how you want to use that, right?
Right.
What advice would you give to people that either want to believe that or do believe it and don't know any further detail?
Yeah. I'd say for a lot of people, people have a general idea of what they're passionate about and what could drive them from a purpose standpoint, right? But I think a lot of people, if it's risky, will kind of hesitate to jump towards that, right? Like speaking from the standpoint of like an entrepreneur, like a startup founder, starting a business is probably one of the craziest things you could possibly do in life, right? It's glamorized in the media, it's glamorized in TV shows as like, oh, you're an entrepreneur, you're gonna be out wining and dining and like meeting with investors and doing this, that. And maybe there are some days like that, right? Yeah. But 95% of the days are just putting your head down, doing hard work, and praying that what you're doing is moving the needle forward for you, right? So I'd say that for a lot of people, finding what they're passionate about, and maybe not necessarily like taking the plunge right away, right? Like let's say you are working at a fast food restaurant, but you really, like your dream is to one day become a doctor or something like that, right? But you can't necessarily like afford to go to medical school or something like that, right? You don't necessarily have to just quit your job and not pay bills and just jump straight for it, right? You can do little things in the meantime, right? How can you read up on certain things about the medical profession? Like what books can you read? What can you read online? How can you increase your knowledge so that you can put yourself in a better position to chase those dreams, right? Yeah. A lot of times, I personally feel like a lot of times passion and purpose tend to line up, right? If you are passionate about something, it's probably your purpose. If it's not, you'll find out, right? The universe has a way of telling you these things. But I think they tend to correlate very closely a lot of times.
Nate, as a developer, your field isn't stereotyped as one that's creative. It's not like being a painter or being a graphic designer. Sure. But I'd like to know if you see your field as one that requires creativity, and if so, in what way?
Yeah. So definitely, especially early on in like the stages of a startup, I feel like a CTO also kind of has a dual role as like a product manager, right? Because when you have a small team, you're limited in your resources, right? So for me, a lot in my day-to-day is not just, making sure that the tech works and that everything's good to go from that standpoint. It's also thinking about, does this flow make sense? Is this going to make sense to our customers, right? One of our engineers, we have a running joke because we'll talk about a lot of different things and we'll say, oh, this makes sense, but we're also like, we're in our 20s, right? So for us, we're tech savvy, we understand how to use our phones and things like that, but we always stop and we come back and say, okay, what about someone who maybe is 70 years old is using our app but is not tech savvy, right? Would this make sense to them, right? So like the joke is like, Nate, you're always thinking about the old people, right? We gotta think about like, well, do they get it, right? So yeah, like creativity and like and understanding like this may work better than this is a big part of it. And then for me, like I personally feel like I've always been a creative person. I used to be a jazz musician. So, from the time I was 10 up until the time I was like 19, right? Yeah. And if you're familiar with jazz, a big part of it is improvisation and solos and things like that. So early on playing jazz, I was terrible at it. Yeah. I could not just think of things off the top of my head to play, right? But as I listened to other artists like Miles Davis, Dizzy Gillespie, I started listening to their solos and I started taking inspiration from what they do and adding it into my improvisation, and that made it better. Yeah. So I feel like we do a similar thing here with Qoins, right? We look at who's kind of come before us, what some of the trends are, and we'll take little bits and pieces from things that we see that we think work and kind of package it in a new way that's best for our customers.
A lot of that strategic thinking you have to do, I'm sure that's been somewhat influenced by your chess career as well, right? You were a former competitive chess player.
Sure, yeah. It's interesting. There's a lot of parallels, not just in chess and life, but also like chess and startups or chess and tech, whatever. From a product standpoint, I'd say some of the best things that chess has taught me is there's rarely one right answer and one wrong answer. There are answers that are better than others and answers that are worse than others, right? So it's similar in chess because there's any given scenario, you have multiple moves you can make, and each one has a higher likelihood of winning or a lower likelihood of winning based on the move. And a lot of times you can win with multiple moves in different scenarios. It's just which one is the best move that's going to set me up for the future or down the road, like 10, 20 moves from now. And then beyond that, it's one of the things I talk about when building our product is not chasing the shiny object, right? It's easy to be very reactive when you see something that pops up and say, oh, like this is an issue, or oh, we saw this, we should go and do this, right? But let's take a step back and say, okay, that's an option, but what does this look like long term? Is this a road that we want to go down? And by chasing this option, am I opening myself up to other vulnerabilities or other issues down the line? Because there's traps in chess, right? Yeah. That people will deliberately dangle a piece out for you to take, and when you take it, now you've exposed your king, or now you've lost your queen because you were so focused on the piece that looked like it was free or it was a good move, right? So it's a similar thing for us when we're building our product.
And if you see a trap, you don't have the option of saying, well, I'm just not going to make any move at all.
No, you have to make a move.
You got to make a move.
You got to make a move.
Yeah. Let's talk about making moves. One challenge when it comes to creativity is we all have these ideal conditions that we think our creativity will flourish in. Give me the right workspace, or give me an aesthetic apartment, or give me an inspired mood or a lot of sunlight out.
Sure.
Have you ever had moments where you've just had to manufacture creative inspiration, even though you felt like your environment, your mood was not supporting you?
Yeah. So all those definitely play a part into it. We early on, before we moved into our office, we used to have meetings. So Christian worked another job at the time, and we would drive around. So he was putting out ground signs for his job at the time, and we would drive around and have meetings. I'd be in the passenger seat. So that environment was not conducive to creativity, right? But I'd say for us, especially early on, one of the things that we just kind of had to figure out, like regardless, was making payments to lenders, right? Because we pay off debt, which means we send payments directly to like your credit card, your student loan, et cetera, right? And early on, one of the barriers was like, okay, how are we going to pay these companies, right? Yeah. We don't have a partnership with the Wells Fargo or Bank of America or things like that, right? And we've we've marketed this product and people are excited about it. We built everything. We don't know how we're going to send these payments out, right? So we had to get creative. And one of the things we came up with, so I worked as a teller at Wells Fargo for a year. So I had a little bit of like inside knowledge on how banking worked. So I thought, okay, we don't need to necessarily have a relationship with these companies. We just need to be able to send them payments. So what we did is we identified our top companies that we wanted to send payments to, and we went to each and every single one of them, each and every single one of their websites, and pulled their payment mailing address. And we would just import that into the app. So then when people came and put in their information, the mailing address was all ready to go. But then we had to figure out how we were going to send out the payments to those addresses. So early on, what we did, we wrote each and every single check that we sent out towards customers. So when we had 100 customers, 150 customers, we said, we want this to work. Obviously this isn't going to be long term. We're not going to be writing checks forever. But in order to test this idea and make sure that it works, we're just going to have to roll up our sleeves and write 150 checks this month and mail each and every single one to the companies that they need to go to. So we just had to figure out a way to make it work.
Yeah, this is clearly not ideal.
No,
so we got to make it work.
Yeah, do things that don't scale until you don't have to. So.
Nate, I can tell your mom's a minister, man. You have it in you. I appreciate you stopping by and sharing your story, man. This has been an awesome conversation.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for having me.
Thanks for tuning in to this week's episode with our special guest, Nate Washington, the co-founder and CTO of Qoins. Be sure to follow Nate on Instagram at instagram.com/Nate Washington Jr. and check out Qoins at their website at coins.io. And be sure to follow them on Instagram or Twitter with the handle Qoins app. Also, check out our website, fee.org/rev1 for articles, monthly videos, and our weekly Monday motivational videos. Also, subscribe to us on YouTube at youtube.com/feeonline. Follow us on Instagram at instagram.com/feeonline. And don't forget to subscribe to the podcast on iTunes, Google Play, and Spotify. Be sure to leave a review. Thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you next time.